blood hit the floor before I realized my mouth was open. One thick drop, then another, dark against the pale linoleum of the gynecologist's waiting room. The taste of metal flooded my tongue, sharp and unmistakable. Somewhere behind me, a woman gasped. A chair scraped violently as someone jumped to their feet. But all I could see was Will. My stepbrother stood over me, chest heaving, his fist still clenched at his side like he was deciding whether to hit me again. His face was twisted with something I recognized too well, rage mixed with satisfaction. The kind of look that said he'd been waiting for this moment. "Choose how you pay," he shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile white walls. He waved a stack of legal papers inches from my face, the pages fluttering wildly. "Sign these now, or you're out. Out of the house. Out of everything." I tried to sit up. The pain hit instantly. 3 days earlier, doctors had cut into me to stop the bleeding after my miscarriage turned into an emergency. Stitches pulled tight across my abdomen as my body protested even the smallest movement. My ribs screamed. My vision blurred. I collapsed back onto the floor, my cheek pressed against the cold tile. A nurse rushed forward, hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. "I'm calling 911, she said, voice cracking. Other patients backed away, some frozen in horror, others whispering frantically. This was a waiting room full of women already dealing with enough pain of their own, and now they were watching a man scream at a bleeding woman on the floor. Will didn't care. He leaned down, close enough that I could smell his cologne, that familiar, sharp scent that suddenly made my stomach churn. "Don't play victim," he sneered. "You've had enough special treatment." I tasted blood again as I swallowed. My jaw throbbed. My hands trembled as I pressed them against the floor, trying to ground myself. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not like this. "Sign them," he barked, slapping the papers against my shoulder. "Or, I swear, you'll never step foot in Dad's house again." The word cut deeper than the slap. 2 weeks ago, my father was alive. 2 weeks ago, I was pregnant. 2 weeks ago, I still believed family meant something. Now I was lying on the floor of a medical office, bleeding from my mouth, while my stepbrother tried to bully me into signing away my entire life. I looked up at him, my vision swimming. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice barely audible. That's when his face changed. The shouting stopped. The noise in the room faded into a distant hum. Will's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as his eyes darkened. I'd seen that look before, back when we were kids. Back when he'd corner me in the garage or shove me into walls when no one was watching. "You think you're being smart," he said quietly. "You think this little scene is going to save you." He straightened, turning slightly as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. "Fine," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You don't want 10,000? Then you get nothing." He looked down at me one last time, disgust written all over his face. "You should have taken the deal." Police officers burst through the doors moments later, their radios crackling. One knelt beside me immediately, asking questions I could barely process. Another officer moved toward Will, who instantly shifted gears, his posture relaxing, his voice softening. "He's upset," Will said smoothly. "Our father just died. Families argue." It was hard to explain away the woman bleeding on the floor. They arrested him anyway. As they helped me onto a stretcher, I stared up at the fluorescent lights passing overhead, my body shaking uncontrollably, not just from pain, but from something far worse, fear. Because lying there, staring at the ceiling, I finally understood something that hadn't fully formed until that moment. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about grief. This was about control. And whatever Will was trying to force me to sign, he was willing to hurt me to get it. The sirens faded as the stretcher rolled through the automatic doors, but the chaos Will left behind stayed with me. The fluorescent lights overhead blurred together as I stared up at them, my jaw throbbing, my abdomen burning with every shallow breath. A paramedic kept asking me questions, my name, my age, if I could feel my fingers, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Still trapped in the waiting room, still hearing Will's voice, still tasting blood. 2 weeks ago, none of this existed. 2 weeks ago, I had a future so clear I could almost touch it. I was 14 weeks pregnant, finally past the stage where every twinge sent me spiraling into panic. I'd started letting myself imagine things. A nursery. Tiny socks. The way my father would look when I told him he was going to be a grandfather. He'd been waiting for that news for years, pretending not to push, but always slipping little comments into conversations. "Whenever you're ready, kiddo," he'd say. "No rush, but I'd be a damn good grandpa." Then my phone rang at 3 in the morning. Dad had collapsed at home. Heart failure, they said. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. No goodbye, no last conversation. Just his jacket folded neatly over a chair and the sound of a monitor that had already been turned off. I remember gripping the edge of the bed, my stomach tightening not from grief alone, but from fear for the baby inside me. Stress wasn't good. I knew that. Everyone told me that. As if knowing made any difference. 3 days after the funeral, the bleeding started. At first, I told myself it was normal. Spotting happened sometimes. The nurse on the phone told me to come in, just to be safe. By the time I arrived at the ER, I was doubled over in pain. Doctors moved fast after that. Too fast. Voices overlapping, gloves snapping on. One doctor met my eyes and said the words I'll never forget. "I'm sorry, we're losing the pregnancy." 14 weeks, gone. Then the bleeding wouldn't stop. I woke up hours later in recovery, sore and empty, my body aching in places I didn't even know could hurt. A D&C. Emergency surgery. A nurse squeezed my hand and told me I was lucky. That, if I'd waited any longer, I might not be here at all. Lucky. I went home numb, to my father's house, the only place that still felt familiar. I slept in my old bedroom, surrounded by things from a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Dad's voice echoed everywhere, in the creak of the stairs, in the ticking clock in the hallway, in the way the house settled at night. I cried quietly, trying not to think too far ahead, trying not to think at all. I didn't know I was on borrowed time. 3 days later, Will and my stepmother Veronica showed up with a moving truck. They didn't call first. They didn't knock. Will used his key and walked in like he owned the place, like I was just another piece of clutter he hadn't gotten around to removing yet. Veronica followed close behind, her lips pulled into a sympathetic smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, Donna, sweetheart," she said softly. "We heard about the baby. Such a tragedy." Her gaze drifted past me, lingering on Dad's antiques, the framed photos on the wall, the furniture he'd spent years collecting. I watched her eyes move, calculating, assessing, like she was already deciding what would sell and what wouldn't. Will didn't bother pretending to care. He dropped a thick stack of papers onto the kitchen counter. The same counter where Dad used to make his famous Sunday pancakes, humming off-key while I complained about the mess. "Sign these," Will said flatly. I stared at the papers, then at him. "What is this?" "The will," he replied. "Dad left everything to Mom and me." The room tilted. I felt it in my chest before my mind caught up. "That's not possible," I said. "Dad wouldn't." "You get 10,000. He cut in. "If you sign today, tomorrow it drops to 5. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not fear, not grief. Understanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family disagreement. This was a takeover. And Will had waited until I was grieving, medicated, and physically broken to make his move. I stared at the papers for a long moment, my hands resting on the edge of the counter to steady myself. The room felt too quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. The idea that my father had written me out of his life without a word, didn't just feel wrong, it felt impossible. "That's ridiculous," I said finally. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. "Dad would never do that. I want to see his real Will." Will's jaw tightened. I watched his face change, watched irritation harden into something darker. That familiar flush crept up his neck, turning his skin that angry shade of purple I remembered from childhood. The color that meant logic was gone. The color that meant someone was about to get hurt. "This times is times the real Will," he snapped, tapping the papers sharply with his finger. "Dad signed it 2 weeks before he died. 2 weeks. The words echoed in my head. 2 weeks ago, Dad was still calling to check on me. 2 weeks ago, he was asking how I was feeling, telling me to take it easy, reminding me to eat something with protein. 2 weeks ago, he was talking about the company like he always did: future contracts, employee bonuses, plans that stretched years ahead. "You were too busy with your pregnancy drama to notice," Will added coldly. Pregnancy drama. I felt something twist deep in my chest. Losing my first child after years of trying, lying in a hospital bed while doctors rushed around me, waking up empty and bleeding. That was what he reduced it to. Drama. Veronica sighed softly beside him, shaking her head like she was disappointed but understanding. "Your father was under a lot of stress," she said gently. "He felt you weren't present anymore. He wanted things simple. Simple. As if erasing me from his will was just a matter of convenience." "I need time," I said. "I need to talk to a lawyer." Will laughed, short and sharp. "You have 24 hours. I opened my mouth to argue, but he was already heading for the door. "Think it over," he said. "You don't want to walk away with nothing." After they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the papers they'd left behind. The house felt different now, smaller, hostile. I didn't sign. I couldn't. Something in my gut screamed that this was wrong, that Dad wouldn't do this to me, not without explaining why. I planned to call a lawyer the next morning. I never got the chance. When I showed up for my follow-up appointment at the gynecologist's office, my body still sore and weak from surgery, I spotted Will immediately. He was sitting in the waiting room like he belonged there, legs stretched out, phone in hand, completely at ease. My heart dropped. "How did you—" I started. "Time's up," he said, standing before I could finish. His voice carried, loud enough for other patients to hear. "Sign now, or get out of the house today." People turned to look. A couple of women exchanged uncomfortable glances. I could feel the heat rise in my face, not from guilt, but from humiliation. "This isn't the place," I said quietly. "I'm here for a medical appointment." "You should have thought of that yesterday," he replied. He held the papers up again. "Last chance." I shook my head. "No." The word felt heavy, but once it left my mouth, I knew I meant it. That was when his hand came out of nowhere. The impact snapped my head to the side, white-hot pain exploding across my face. I went down hard, the air knocked from my lungs as I hit the floor. The taste of blood flooded my mouth instantly. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone screamed. I tried to push myself up, but my body betrayed me. My ribs screamed. The stitches from surgery felt like they were tearing apart. I heard a nurse shouting, heard someone say they were calling the police. Will looked down at me with open contempt. "You think you're too good for 10,000, he said. "Fine. Now you get nothing." That slap wasn't just violence. It was a message. He wanted me broken, afraid, publicly humiliated, and too weak to fight back. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized yet, was that the moment he raised his hand, he crossed a line he could never uncross. And everything after that would cost him far more than he was prepared to pay. The police arrived within minutes, red and blue lights flashing through the glass doors of the clinic, turning the waiting room into something surreal. An officer knelt beside me, asking if I could tell him what happened. Another pulled Will aside. I watched him switch personalities instantly. His shoulders relaxed, his voice softened, his face arranged into something that almost passed for concern. "He's upset," Will said calmly. "Our father just died. Families argue. She's been emotional." It was hard to explain away a woman bleeding on the floor with a clear handprint on her face. The officers didn't buy it. They cuffed him anyway. As they helped me onto a stretcher, I caught one last look at Will. There was no fear in his eyes, just annoyance. Like this was a minor inconvenience, nothing more. Veronica showed up at the station less than an hour later. I didn't see her, but I knew she was there. By the time I was discharged later that afternoon, bruised, shaken, and exhausted, Will was already out on bail, 2 hours. That's all it took for him to walk free. Margie drove me back to Dad's house because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The painkillers dulled the ache in my jaw and ribs, but they did nothing for the dread settling in my chest. As her ancient Buick turned onto the familiar street, something felt wrong immediately. Too quiet, too empty. Then I saw the front lawn. My belongings were everywhere. Clothes strewn across wet grass, cardboard boxes collapsed and soggy, books swollen with water, their pages curling at the edges. Photo albums split open, pictures plastered together by the sprinklers that had already soaked half of everything I owned. Margie slammed on the brakes. "Oh my God," she whispered. I opened the door and stepped out slowly, my legs weak beneath me. Each step felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. That's when I saw it. My mother's jewelry box lay shattered on the driveway. It was a small wooden box, dark cherry, hand-carved. Dad gave it to her on their 10th anniversary. After she died, he kept it on his dresser, never moving it. Now it was broken open, splintered, its contents spilled across concrete. Pearls scattered everywhere, rolling into cracks like they were trying to disappear. Something inside me broke. I dropped to my knees without realizing it, ignoring the pain, gathering the pearls with shaking hands. I couldn't stop crying, not quiet tears, the kind that come from deep inside, the kind that leave you gasping. Margie knelt beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "This isn't right," she kept saying. "This is not what your daddy wanted." A neighbor's door creaked open. Mrs. Patterson from next door hovered on her porch, wringing her hands. After a moment, she crossed the lawn toward us, glancing nervously at the house like she expected Will to burst out at any second. "Donna, dear," she said softly, "I didn't want to say anything at the funeral, but your father was very upset the week before he passed." My heart skipped. "Upset how?" "He came over late one night to borrow my phone," she whispered. "Said he didn't trust his own anymore. Said someone was listening." That night, I slept on Margie's couch, an ice pack pressed to my swollen jaw, the house dark and silent around us. I couldn't stop thinking about Dad's last weeks, how he'd grown quieter, more cautious, how he'd lowered his voice during phone calls. I'd blamed the medication, the stress, the heart condition. At 3 a.m, the sound of breaking glass jolted us awake. Margie grabbed her late husband's baseball bat as we huddled in her bedroom, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might tear itself free. By the time police arrived, whoever it was had fled. But they left a message. Spray painted across Margie's garage door in thick black letters were 3 words that made my blood run cold. "Stop digging." Will showed up the next morning like nothing had happened. Fake concern plastered across his face, menace just beneath the surface. "Neighborhood's getting dangerous," he said casually. "Might want to think about moving, somewhere safer. Maybe another state." Margie straightened, her voice sharp as glass. "William Henderson," she said, using his full name. "I've known you since you were 16 and stealing from your mother's purse. You don't scare me." She waited until he left before turning to me, eyes hard and focused. "Honey," she said, opening her laptop, "your daddy didn't do this to you." And for the first time since the hospital floor, I felt something other than fear. I felt certainty. Margie didn't waste time after Will finally drove away. The moment his car disappeared down the street, she locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat down at her small dining table like a woman preparing for surgery. The sweetness drained from her face, replaced by a focus so sharp it made me straighten up without thinking. "Sit," she said, already opening her laptop. "And listen carefully." Margie had been my father's friend for more than 20 years. She wasn't just some neighbor who baked casseroles and nodded politely at barbecues. She'd done the books for Underwood Construction for 15 years before retiring. She knew every contract, every account, every habit my father had when it came to money. And my father, bless him, had never been great about changing passwords. "Your daddy trusted people," she muttered, typing fast. "Sometimes too much." The screen filled with spreadsheets and transaction logs that meant nothing to me at first. Numbers scrolling by, dates, account codes. Margie adjusted her reading glasses and leaned closer, her expression tightening by the second. "Well, I'll be damned," she whispered. "What?" My voice sounded small, even to me. She turned the laptop toward me. "This," she said, tapping the screen, "is not normal." For the past 5 years, money had been bleeding out of the company, not in obvious chunks that would trigger alarms. Small amounts, carefully spaced, fake invoices paid to shell companies, payments to vendors that didn't exist, salaries deposited to employees who had never worked there. Will had been stealing from the company. My stomach dropped. "How much?" Margie exhaled slowly. "Just in the last year? Almost $500,000. The room felt suddenly too warm. My father had worked his entire life to build that company. He paid his employees well. He took care of them. And Will had been siphoning money off the top like it was his personal allowance. But Margie wasn't done. "There's something else," she said quietly, pulling up another set of records. "See these withdrawals?" I nodded. "They start getting bigger about 6 months ago," she continued, "right around the time your daddy's heart problems got worse." A chill crawled up my spine. I thought about the way Dad had changed during those months. How tired he'd been. How confused sometimes. How the doctors kept adjusting his medication, trying to figure out why he wasn't responding the way he should. "They said his condition was unpredictable," I whispered, "that his body wasn't reacting normally." Margie's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've seen this before," she said. "Not often, but enough." I looked at her sharply. "Seen what?" She hesitated, then met my eyes. Family members hurrying along an inheritance by tampering with medication. The words landed like a blow. "No," I said immediately. "Will wouldn't." Margie raised a hand. "I'm not saying anything yet. I'm saying we don't ignore patterns." My thoughts raced. Dad's medication changes, his paranoia about his phone, the way he'd whispered sometimes, like he didn't want to be overheard. And then suddenly I remembered something that made my breath catch. Dad's last lucid moment in the hospital. He'd grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, eyes urgent. "Check the basement safe," he'd whispered, "behind the water heater. Your mother's birthday." At the time, I thought it was the morphine talking, a dying man clinging to memories. But now, "Margie," I said slowly, "there's a safe in the basement." Her eyebrows shot up. "There is?" He told me about it right before he died. She sat back in her chair, staring at me. "Well," she said after a moment, "that changes things." We both knew what it meant. If Will and Veronica had changed the locks, they were trying to keep something hidden, something they hadn't found yet. Before we could say anything else, a loud bang echoed through the house. We froze, hearts pounding, listening. Silence followed. Then another sound, footsteps outside, retreating fast. Margie stood and peeked through the window. "Someone was checking the doors," she said calmly. Too calmly. That night, neither of us slept much. Every creak made me flinch, every shadow looked wrong, and just before dawn, when exhaustion finally dragged me under, one thought stayed with me like a warning. My father hadn't just been sick. He'd been afraid. And whatever he'd hidden in that house, someone was willing to threaten us to keep it buried. By morning, the fear had settled into something colder and sharper. Determination. Margie poured coffee like this was just another workday, not the aftermath of threats and shattered glass. She slid a mug toward me and reopened her laptop, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "If someone thinks they can scare us into stopping," she said, "they don't know me very well." She started mapping the money, not just totals, but patterns, who authorized what, which accounts fed into others, how long the trail went cold before resurfacing somewhere else. The numbers told a story, and Margie knew how to read it. Will hadn't just been skimming. He'd built a system. False invoices paid to shell companies that then routed money back through a maze of accounts. Ghost employees with payroll deposits timed to look routine, clever enough to pass a casual glance. Invisible, unless you knew where to look. "This isn't petty theft," Margie said, adjusting her glasses. "This is wire fraud, tax evasion." And she tapped the screen. "He's been stealing from the employee pension fund." My chest tightened. The pension fund was sacred to my dad. He'd talked about it constantly, especially after his first heart attack. "These people gave me their best years," he'd said. "I owe them security." Will hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed dozens of families who trusted my father. Margie pulled up another timeline, overlaying financial spikes with medical records I'd kept from the hospital. "Look here," she said. 6 months ago, that's when the withdrawals jump. 6 months ago was also when Dad's medication changed for the 3rd time. I remembered the phone calls, Dad sounding confused, tired, frustrated. Doctors saying his response was atypical. Nurses adjusting dosages. Will offering to help, insisting on managing Dad's pills after the last heart attack. "Let me take something off your plate," he'd said. "You need rest." Margie leaned back, eyes narrowing. What if he wasn't helping? The room felt suddenly smaller. I swallowed hard. "You're saying I'm saying we test the theory," she replied calmly. "We don't accuse, we verify." Then my mind jumped back to the hospital room, Dad's grip on my hand, his urgency. Asterisk. Behind the water heater. Your mother's birthday. Asterisk. It hadn't sounded like morphine anymore. It sounded like a warning. "We need to get into the house," I said. Margie didn't hesitate. "We do, but not during the day. And not the front door." That afternoon, she made calls, quiet ones, to old contacts who owed her favors. A retired auditor, a former IRS investigator, people who could tell us what to look for and how to preserve it. We took notes. We planned. We waited. At dusk, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, Will's voice was there, smooth and threatening all at once. "Heard you had some trouble last night. Neighborhood's getting dangerous. You should think about moving, somewhere safer." I deleted the message, but not the chill it left behind. At 2 a.m, dressed in black like we were playing a role neither of us wanted, Margie and I slipped across the backyard of Dad's house. The broken basement window was exactly where I remembered it from high school, never fixed, never noticed. Margie held the flashlight while I eased the window open, my hands shaking more from adrenaline than pain. "Technically," she whispered, "this is still your house until probate." The basement smelled like Dad. Old Spice and sawdust from his workshop, familiar and devastating. We moved quietly, hearts pounding, until we reached the water heater. Behind it, just like he'd said, was a false panel. The safe sat there, unassuming and heavy. I entered my mother's birthday. The lock clicked open on the first try. Inside were 3 things that made the world tilt. First, Dad's real will, properly notarized, dated just 1 month ago. Second, a thick folder labeled Times Forensic Audit Asterisk, filled with meticulous notes, spreadsheets, and copies of records Margie recognized immediately. Third, a letter in Dad's shaky handwriting. He knew. He'd documented everything. He'd hired an outside firm Will didn't know about. He believed someone was tampering with his medication. And he'd been scared enough to hide evidence and ask me to trust Margie and his lawyer. My hands trembled as I folded the letter. Then Margie inhaled sharply and reached for another folder tucked behind the first. Newspaper clippings, old ones, names circled, dates underlined. Veronica's first husband. Heart problems. Second husband. Kidney failure. Third husband. Stroke. All wealthy. All dead within 3 years. Dad had been husband number 4. We took photos of everything. Then Margie noticed something else. The computer upstairs still logged in. "Quick look," she said. Upstairs, the house felt wrong, empty and violated. Will's email was a goldmine of arrogance and stupidity. Messages about double-dosing pills, transferring money before audits, and one line that made my blood run cold. Asterisk. "If Donna won't sign, we'll handle her like we discussed." Asterisk. That was the moment fear gave way to resolve. This wasn't just about what they'd done. It was about stopping what they were willing to do next. We didn't speak much as we left the house before dawn. The sky was just beginning to lighten, that gray-blue hour where everything feels suspended between night and day. I kept replaying my father's letter in my head. Every shaky word burned into my memory. He hadn't just suspected something was wrong. He'd known, and he'd been racing the clock to protect me. By the time we reached Margie's house, the adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But there was no rest coming. Not now, not after what we'd seen. Margie spread the evidence across her dining table like pieces of a puzzle. Copies of emails, financial records, photographs of the safe's contents. She moved with methodical calm, labeling files, backing everything up to multiple drives. Watching her work was strangely grounding. This was her world patterns, proof, truth, hidden in plain sight. "Honey," she said quietly, not looking up, "what we have here is enough to destroy them financially. But if we're right about the medication..." She trailed off, letting the weight of that hang in the air. "If we're right," I finished, "they killed my father." Saying it out loud felt surreal, like accusing the ground beneath my feet of suddenly giving way. But the evidence didn't flinch. It just sat there. silent and damning. Margie nodded once. Which means we do this the right way. No mistakes, no shortcuts. The first call we made that morning was to Gary Garrison. Gary had been my father's lawyer for over 30 years. His office sat above an old hardware store downtown, all wood paneling and shelves packed with law books that looked older than I was. When we arrived, he took one look at my face, still bruised, still swollen, and his expression hardened. "I knew it," he said after reviewing the documents, slapping his desk so hard his coffee jumped. "Your daddy came to me 6 weeks ago." Scared out of his mind, Gary told us everything, how my father had suspected Will was stealing, how he believed someone was interfering with his medication, how he'd asked Gary to prepare a new will and quietly contact an outside forensic firm. He didn't want to act too fast. He was afraid that if Will realized he was onto him, he'd do something reckless. "He was trying to protect you," Gary said softly. Even at the end, Gary made calls immediately. Judges, federal prosecutors, people who owed him favors from decades of careful lawyering. Within hours, the estate was frozen. No assets could be moved. No property sold. Will's clock was officially ticking. That afternoon, Detective Riley walked into Gary's office. She was everything I didn't know I needed in that moment. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, no wasted words. She listened without interrupting as Margie laid out the financial crimes and I explained the medication concerns. When I mentioned the emails about double dosing, her jaw tightened. "My mother went through something similar," she said quietly. "Caregiver poisoning. I take these cases personally." Riley told us she'd already been tracking Veronica, 3 dead husbands across multiple states, always wealthy, always natural causes. The insurance companies had flagged the pattern years ago, but there'd never been enough evidence to move forward. "Your father was supposed to be her retirement plan," Riley said bluntly. The next week blurred into long days and sleepless nights. Margie worked her magic, tracing every stolen dollar. Gary prepared legal filings that locked Will into a corner he couldn't see yet. Riley obtained warrants for phone records, bank accounts, and most importantly, my father's medication bottles. When the toxicology results came back, the room went silent. The pills contained 3 times the prescribed dose of digitalis. "At that level," Riley said, "it causes exactly the symptoms your father had. Slow enough to look natural, fast enough to kill within months." There was no room left for doubt. But Riley wasn't satisfied. "We need more," she said. "Financial crimes will bury him, but murder cases live or die on intent. We need him talking." That's when the idea came to me. Will had one fatal flaw: his ego. He always needed to feel smarter than everyone else, richer, untouchable, and most of all, victorious. "If I let him think he's won," I said slowly, "he'll brag." Margie looked worried. Gary frowned. Riley studied me carefully. "He's dangerous," Margie said. "I know," I replied. My voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. "But he's also greedy, and greed makes people stupid." Silence stretched across the room. Then Riley nodded. "All right," she said. "We let him think you're broken." I exhaled slowly. If this was going to work, I couldn't just act defeated. I had to become it. And that meant walking straight back into the lion's den, smiling, shaking, and pretending I didn't already hold his future in my hands. The call was the hardest thing I'd done so far. I sat at Margie's kitchen table, phone in my hand, staring at Will's name on the screen like it might bite me if I pressed the button. Detective Riley had fitted me with a small recording device earlier that morning, hidden beneath my sweater. It felt heavy, even though it wasn't. Every breath reminded me it was there. "Remember," Riley had said, "let him lead, don't rush him, let him talk." I closed my eyes and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Well, well," Will said, his voice smug and relaxed. "About time." "It's me," I said, forcing my voice to shake. That part wasn't hard. I can't do this anymore." There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "I figured you'd come around." "I'm tired, Will," I whispered. "I'm broke. I'm alone. I just want this to stop." I could practically hear his smile. So I'll sign," I said. "Whatever you want. I just want my mom's jewelry box back, please." He didn't answer right away. I imagined him savoring the moment, stretching it out. "You should have done that at the hospital," he finally said. "But fine. I'm feeling generous today." "How much?" I asked. 20,000, he replied. "Final offer." "Okay," I said quickly, too quickly. I added a small sob to cover it. "When?" "Tomorrow," he said. "Dad's office. Bring whoever you want to witness it. I want this legal and final." When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. Gary smiled for the first time in days. "He wants witnesses," he said. "Good." Riley nodded. "We'll give him witnesses." That night, I made a second call. This one was even riskier. "Will," I said when he picked up, "there's something else." "What now?" he snapped, irritation creeping into his voice. "Dad mentioned another account," I said carefully. "Before he died, something about Mom's life insurance that was never claimed. A safety deposit box at First National. I don't want trouble, but if there's more money, maybe we could work something out." The silence on the line was electric. "Another account?" he said slowly. "How much?" "I don't know," I replied. "He said maybe 100,000, maybe more." Greed rushed in so fast it was almost audible. "You better not be lying to me," Will said. "I'm not," I whispered. "I just need enough to start over, to get away from all this." He believed me because he wanted to. The next afternoon, Will arrived at Dad's office like a king taking his throne. He'd already claimed my father's chair, feet propped up on the desk, flipping through papers like the place belonged to him. His girlfriend Tiffany trailed behind, 25, blonde, glued to her phone, taking selfies in front of Dad's awards wall. "Let's get this over with," Will said, sliding the papers toward me. "Sign here, here, and here." A greasy-looking man stood near the door, sweating despite the air conditioning. The notary. Vincent. Riley had shown me his photo the night before. 3-time convicted forger, currently on parole. "Before I sign," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to understand exactly what I'm giving up." Will rolled his eyes. "Everything. Estate, company, claims. In exchange, you get your money and you disappear." "And the employees?" I asked. "Dad promised them profit sharing, pensions." "Not my problem," Will laughed. "Company's being sold tomorrow. 3 million cash. Could have waited and gotten 10, but I want this done." There it was. The wire picked it all up. Veronica walked in then, champagne bottle in hand. "For after," she said lightly. "We should celebrate." I looked at her. "How long have you two been planning this?" She smiled. "Planning what, dear?" I pulled out my phone. Emails. About handling the old man. About double dosing his medication. Will shot to his feet. "You hacked my email." "No," I said calmly. "You left your computer logged in." Tiffany looked between us, confused. "Willie Bear? What is she talking about?" "Nothing," Will snapped. "Just sign the papers." I picked up the pen, then paused. "One more thing," I said softly. "How did Dad really die?" "Heart failure," Veronica answered too quickly. "Funny," I said, "because his pills tested positive for triple the prescribed dose of digitalis." The room went dead silent. Will lunged toward me, and that was when the door opened. Detective Riley stepped inside with 6 federal agents behind her. "William Henderson," she said calmly, "you're under arrest." Everything Will thought he owned collapsed in that moment. And for the first time since the hospital floor, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. Will didn't even make it 3 steps. The moment Detective Riley spoke his name, the color drained from his face. Panic replaced arrogance in a split second. He shoved past the desk, knocking over a framed photo of my father, and bolted for the door. A federal agent tackled him hard into one of Dad's prized potted ficus plants, dirt exploding across the carpet. Tiffany screamed. The fake notary tried to squeeze out a window and got stuck halfway, crying about his parole. Veronica didn't run. She was smarter than that. She grabbed her phone instead, thumbs flying as she tried to delete messages. Margie, 73 years old and underestimated her entire life, stepped forward and smacked the phone clean out of her hand with her purse. "That's assault!" Veronica shrieked. Margie smiled sweetly. "Honey, I'm old and confused. I thought it was a weapon." They cuffed Will first. As they hauled him up, he started shouting, desperation spilling out. She attacked me first. At the doctor's office, I was defending myself. Detective Riley pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward him. You mean this footage? She asked calmly. The security video from the gynecologist's office played clearly Will striking a woman barely recovered from surgery. 6 witnesses frozen in shock. Will went silent. Outside the office, employees had gathered, drawn by the noise. When they saw Will in handcuffs, some of them started crying. Not from sympathy, from relief. Tom, my father's foreman for 20 years, had to be physically restrained when he realized what Will had done. The trial that followed was brutal and fast. Will burned through 3 lawyers, each one quitting once they saw the evidence. The financial crimes alone carried decades of prison time. But the murder charge, that was what sealed his fate. The prosecutor laid it out piece by piece. Years of embezzlement, tampered medication, emails bragging about helping a sick man along. Then Veronica's history came out. 3 husbands, 3 natural deaths. Millions inherited. Medical notes annotated in her handwriting. Dosage increases planned weeks in advance. When Tiffany testified, trying to sound clueless, she destroyed what little defense Will had left. He said they were just helping him along. She shrugged. So we could have 10 million. The jury deliberated for 43 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Will received life for murder plus 25 years for federal charges. Veronica got 30 to life for multiple murders. As they read the verdict, Will fainted. I didn't look away. Justice didn't end there. Underwood Construction was saved. Without Will's theft, the company was worth far more than anyone realized. The employee pension fund was restored with interest. Margaret from accounting sobbed at her desk when she learned she could still retire next year. Dad's people were taken care of, just like he promised. 6 months later, I stood on a construction site wearing my father's old hard hat as we broke ground on a new children's hospital, something he'd dreamed about for years. Tom squeezed my shoulder and said, "He'd be proud of you, Donna." I knew he was right. I found love again, too, slowly and carefully, with someone gentle, honest, someone who never raised his voice, let alone his hand. And when I found out I was pregnant again, I drove straight to Dad's grave. "We did it," I told him. "They don't get to hurt anyone else." They thought I was weak. They thought grief made me easy to crush. They were wrong. And if you're still here with me right now, let me say this clearly. If you've ever been hurt by family, betrayed when you were at your lowest, or made to feel powerless when you deserved protection, this story is for you. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it comes hard. If this story moved you, hit asterisk, asterisk, like asterisk, 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 subscribe, asterisk, asterisk, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them, because silence protects abusers. And stories like this, they make sure the truth never stays buried.